I learned a lot during that journey, but I will start off by saying it was way easier for me to do it because I was not the practicing doctor. There's a difference when you can actually step in and do the role of being the chiropractor that sabotages your ability to actually duplicate systems.
Welcome to the Table Talk podcast, where we get real, meeting with industry professionals and experts in the chiropractic world, talking about the newest and latest, how to scale your practice, the struggles that we all face in practice, and how you can take your practice to the next level. Hello, chiropractors. It's Dr. Kendall Price with Elevate Marketing Solutions, and I am here with someone who has actually become a good friend here in the past year or so. Baron Hoag. I know a lot of people introduce you as Dr. Baron Hoag, but we've had this conversation before, right?
Yeah.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Doc, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. So Baron is with an organization that I am fully on board with, fully support, and have been donating to for some time now, which is the Chiropractic Defense Council. And we're going to get into what that is much more in depth. But Baron, if you're going to give like a 20-second synopsis of what you guys are doing, how would you explain it to the listeners out there?
Yeah, defending the rights of practicing chiropractors all over the world.
That was nice and simple. I like it. And so I know that we've had some conversations over a whiskey here or there that we've talked about, your journey with chiropractic, and the space that you kind of came and how you evolved into where you are now. And so I'm just going to open the floor and let you share your story, how you came to be a part of this wonderful profession and in the position that you're in now.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a God-breathed journey. Nothing that I had ever planned or considered or even thought capable of doing. But I was going to college. Music was my past. I was a lead singer of a band, and I was convinced I was going to be a musician for most of my life. Ended up getting my girlfriend pregnant in my freshman year of college. That definitely put a different plan in motion for me. At the time, it was the scariest thing I'd ever faced, but obviously God's just great. And, my daughter's now a chiropractor in my clinic. So, I mean, that journey's been incredible. She's been my barometer. But yeah, so I was in college, never finished school. I don't have a bachelor's degree or anything. I have my college diploma or my high school diploma, but that's it as far as, I went to school. I ended up going to school for about 4 years. I have enough credits to graduate. I just went to a private school that didn't do liberal arts. So I kept changing my major, which has been a universal theme in my life as someone that I don't really like the rules that other people put in place. I kind of like to live life according to my rules and according to the rules of the Bible. And so I've always been kind of that guy. God knew that I had the makeup to be the guy to challenge governments, to challenge the status quo. And but long story short, I took a job in a chiropractor's office because I got fired from a job from being a little cocky SOB. And I took a job and I knew nothing about chiropractic. Never been to one. No one in my family had ever been to one. They were clients with a consultant at the time called David Singer that was really heavy Scientology, learning the primary script and essentially kind of creating an emotional manipulation of the patient to be able to get them to commit to care. Yeah. I didn't believe what I was saying, but I memorized the scripts. I did my job and I was very good at it. But I was very disconnected from this thing called chiropractic, but had an experience with a patient that kind of rocked me to my core. 73, 74-year-old man, was there just to kind of shut his wife up. And, I talked him into 2 weeks of care. If at the end of 2 weeks, he didn't feel it was worth his time, I'd tell his wife to leave him alone. And, he came in at the end of 2 weeks and he just blew me away. He was bawling and telling me that we gave him his life back. He wanted to thank me. I wasn't the chiropractor. All I did was kind of con him into care. And, I just, for whatever reason, God used that moment as a catalyst in my life to kind of be like, okay, wait a minute. I'm plugged into something that's way bigger than me here. I don't really understand what we're doing in this office, but if it can do that to that guy and he's thanking me, I'm missing something here. And so I really made a commitment back in 1996 with God that said, I'm going to own this thing chiropractic, that I want to be more plugged into what happened to that guy. And at that point, I hadn't been getting adjusted myself. I was just coming in, doing my job, and leaving. So the journey from there is a little windy. I've made just every mistake you can possibly make in this profession. I ended up owning and operating 9 clinics in the late 90s, early 2000s. From that, I went into consulting and started helping other doctors do the business aspect of healthcare. I was the first certified professional coder in the profession. So I was the guy that was helping people learn how to deal with this new crazy thing called managed care, and getting reimbursed by insurance companies and dealing with audits and all of that. Did that for about 6, 7 years. And then I ended up selling my consulting company and got into the EHR space and started helping develop electronic medical records. That was coming into being in the mid 2000s. And then I ended up with the unique opportunity to become the executive director of the Ohio State Chiropractic Association. And so that was my first really look under the belly of the profession. When you're a consultant and you're speaking and you're going to conventions and you're in the vendor hall, that's a completely different aspect of the profession than when you start dealing on the association side and all the national and state associations. So I made a lot of mistakes. I mean, you want to talk about, doing things wrong. But I had a quick learning curve with the association. Got my bearings after my first year, and we did some pretty amazing things. I was very, very pleased with my resume at the association. But the long story short, during my time in the association is really what drove what I'm doing today, why I have the perception I have today, and why I believe I understand why chiropractic has been stagnant for the last 50 years. And that's largely because the organizational structures that we have within chiropractic limit the ability of those organizations to do the work that needs to be done. And it was really a Buckminster Fuller quote that really jolted me. And that was that you cannot change an existing reality by fighting it. You have to create a new model that makes the old model obsolete. And up to that point, I was on the board of Chiro Congress, which was a national association. I was serving on committees with both the ICA and the ACA. Had this belief that I could bring the ICA and ACA together. Thought that I could, bring state associations together. And I was really hell bent because we were having such success in Ohio that I wanted to take that to other parts of the country. And I just quickly realized this isn't going to happen. There was this big movement at that time. This was in 2016. There was a big movement to expand the scope of chiropractic to include drugs.
Remember this? Yep.
And I put my foot down. And so then they ran this coup against me in Ohio. And, next thing you know, all I'm doing is putting out internal fires. We literally had circled the wagons and shot inward. And I'm like, this is insane. But it was an epiphany for me. This is what happens. This is what happens in our profession. This is why we can't sustain growth, because somebody gets irritated because it's not their way, and then they just sabotage it. And we've seen that with the ICA and ACA over the decades. And so that's where the idea of One Chiropractic, which is the nonprofit that I'm running now, came from, was the idea we're going to create something new. We're going to create an organization that isn't about your philosophy, isn't about your way you practice, isn't about you picking a side. It's about believing that we can actually be one profession. We don't have to all practice and agree. There are boundaries. My boundaries were drugs will never enter the profession, and the adjustment needs to be a primary service. That's it. I don't. If you want to do nutrition, you want to do laser rehab, I'm good with all that stuff. But don't sacrifice the adjustment for those things, because those are reimbursed better. Like, we can't ever give up on our adjustment. That's our defining feature as a profession. And if we give up on that, then we just become another therapist, essentially. And so we had boundaries, but I don't care how you do it in your practice. And so we started pushing that. And then obviously COVID happened, and that led us to the CDC and all that stuff. But yeah, my journey is a series of making a lot of mistakes, still believing in my vision enough to course correct, learn from them, and achieve my goals after them.
That's awesome. And, I like, having worked in our state association as a vice president, like, I know what you're saying. Like, it's a totally different world that you deal in the political space and the things that you have to consider as you're making decisions, for chiropractors at large. And so yeah. I can definitely commiserate at times with that and how that is. But I want to go back to something that you said, because I think it kind of ties into some of the things that we talked about beforehand, which was organization and coming together. And so I want to go back to owning 9 clinics, because
Yeah.
I think that it takes a very special kind of person to not only be able to run 9 clinics, to be able to organize and operate that. And so I want to dive into that and what you did that made it successful and the struggles and the things that you faced along the way, if that's okay with you.
Oh, absolutely. I'm very, I learned a lot during that journey, but I will start off by saying it was way easier for me to do it because I was not the practicing doctor. There's a difference when you can actually step in and do the role of being the chiropractor that sabotages your ability to actually duplicate systems, because then you're also trying to duplicate yourself. I didn't have to duplicate myself because I wasn't the treating physician.
Yep.
So it was very easy for me to build a relationship with my practicing chiropractors to know what their role was and what mine was. And so is that I've seen as I've consulted, like you said, I consulted for almost 10 years trying to help doctors with the business aspect. And the one area that it always fell short was with them. They kept trying to duplicate themselves and they can't do that. Like that's the number one problem with practice growth, is the idea that the way I grow is duplicating myself. You have to actually develop systems and procedures that don't have anything to do with you. That way
Yep.
you can just plug and play. But when we try to get other people to be us, that's where we have turnover with associates. That's where we have turnover for office managers and so on and so forth. So, the mistakes I made was really that, thinking that I was very successful in one clinic. I'm going to take what I did there and go to the other one. I learned very quickly after I got to 4 that I needed to be able to build a brand new clinic, same philosophies, but the procedures were going to be very different to that unique space, to the talents of those unique people. So they would go to one clinic to learn the basic philosophy. And what I mean by that was, this is how we process a patient. This is, the care plans that we recommended. But how we went about doing that was very different clinic to clinic, depending on the personnel I had and the skill sets I had of those people. Where I still have a problem with large consulting groups today is they still try to turn everybody into the same robot, thinking that that's going to guarantee a certain production out of it. And it just isn't true. Where you can actually find the variances in people and build systems around those variances, that's where you have consistent outcomes. And most consultants don't do that because they say, here's the script. This is how we want you to say it. Every patient on day 2 is ready to hear the same thing, which isn't true. You and I both know day
Yep.
2 is very different for every single patient because it depends on how they came into it, how they responded from their adjustment, what their past experiences were. Those are all factors to know when people are ready to hear certain things. And so the reason we were able to do 9 and I was able to have that success is I allowed everyone to be their unique self. We had our pillars, our core principles, but the way that we achieved those core principles, I allowed to be different from clinic to clinic. So it literally was a different experience in one clinic than the other, even though the outcome was the same. But it took me a little while to figure that out. I kept thinking I had to cookie cutter. This is working so well here, I'm just going to go 10 miles down the road. Believe it or not, 10 miles down the road is a completely different culture. It's a completely different economic radius. It's a completely different, geographic area of how people get to A, B, and C. And so not taking those variables into consideration and allowing us to develop those systems that are unique to that area, it allowed my team to really flourish, because I would walk into a team meeting and I'd be like, listen, these are the KPIs, right? These are our key performance indicators. I don't care how, I don't worry about the journey. I just want to know that we're going to get there. Now, you guys tell me, based on your town, based on how this is working, based on your personal skill sets, what do we need to develop to get to that KPI? Rather than me coming in saying, well, I know the only way to get to the KPI is to turn left here, right there. I didn't do that. And I tried that initially and I kept burning through staff. I kept burning through chiropractors. When I allowed them to be themselves and not worry about the journey, but just make sure we get to the destination, it started clicking on better cylinders.
I had 4 associates that were in my practice when I was in practice that worked for me over the years, and each one of them was that exact way. They were
Yeah.
all so different, but we could take their unique traits and filter it into a system to say, look, it may not be word for word exactly how I say it,
Yep.
but like, don't be a robot. Like,
Yep.
make it make sense for you and communicate that message the way that you want to. So I think that that's important. And I think that this is where I love a lot of coaching groups, right?
Yeah.
I like going to all of these different things because you pick up bits and pieces here and here, and you can amalgamate that to make it makes sense for you.
100%. 100% agree.
And so as you moved into that consulting role, I mean, what spurred that transition, and what was the thing that you saw as you were consulting? And I think I know what your answer is going to be, but what was the thing that you saw in those practices that you worked with that you would say that they struggled with the most, or the thing that is going to be that gem that anyone out there listening is going to, be able to take away from this?
Yeah. So the only reason I transitioned is because I was young and dumb. The first four clinics, I didn't own, I just ran. And then I was 50-50 partners in the other five. And I was dumb, and it was on a handshake agreement. And long story short, my partner did not come through with their end and took all the money. And so I got into consulting because I just was an idiot. We were doing great in the clinic, but I was a bad business person on the back end because I was only 21 years old, and I just was hustling, and I was looked like success, but I just kept thinking the payday would come, and it never did. So I wasn't one of those guys that I was so good at it that I'm like, I'm going to go teach other people how to do it. I was good at it, but I needed another gig. And what had happened was I went to, this is God's perfect timing. I went to a seminar on coding and documentation, and I was blown away what we weren't billing for in our offices. And so I immediately reached out to them and I said, hey, I have 9 clinics. And they were blown away by me that I wasn't a chiropractor, but I could have the conversation I was having with them. Now, mind you, in this time, I'd been sending myself to seminars. I'd been going to technique seminars. I'd been going everywhere because I wanted to own and understand what chiropractic was. That moment that I had with that patient really did change me. And I didn't want to just be a guy that promoted chiropractic. I wanted to be a guy that knew chiropractic. And I could hang with anybody on any level and explain why what we're doing works. And so I could play a chiro on TV very well. And so anyway, the guys that were running that company that put the seminar on, they offered me a job on the spot. It was 2 weeks later, I found out what was going on with my partner. And so then I'm like, I need to do something. And they offered me a job that was paying me almost 5 times more than what I was currently making. And so I had to take the switch because I couldn't trust my partner anymore. So that's why I made the transition. They taught me a lot about the consulting side. So they're the ones that really gave me all my coding and documentation and why I went and got certified in that. And, we were very successful in that company. They were just also not great business people and kind of horrible humans. And so I was only there for about a year, and I learned a lot about what I never wanted to be or do in business. Again, I'm still 22, 23 years old, so I'm very young. I'm just kind of ahead of myself in a lot of things. But then I actually started my consulting by trying to fix everything that they had done to hurt chiropractors. So my first year, I had made enough money working for them that my first year, I didn't charge anybody to be their consultant. I promised them I'm going to make good on their promises. Let me help clean these things up and do this the right way. So that gave me a lot of goodwill in the profession, that I was honorable enough to do the right thing, even though I was a part of a bad thing. And so then I started charging for consulting. And what I learned in my consulting was very different, because I was a singer client before, and I was so frustrated that I paid a bunch of money to be a part of it. Then I had to pay to go to the seminar. Then I had to pay to buy all the resources that he taught me to do at the seminar that I already paid for. Any money he was helping me make, he was taking, because I had to keep giving him money. And I'm like, this is insane. This is not like, and then I got frustrated because I'd fly my team to an event. Everyone would be excited for a day. We'd go back to the clinic and we would maybe implement 2% of what we learned in the weekend, because we just went right back into our bad habits. So my consulting was, I would go to the office, train everybody at the office, actually change the forms, change the paperwork, be there the first day that they're implementing it to help. If they pee off the paper, put them back on. So there was guaranteed results that came from what they were spending with me. And so that, it was great. I was minimal clients, but very high price, because the impact was so high at that point that they didn't have to fly their whole team. They just had to fly me. So the expense was way lower, but the impact was way higher. But I couldn't help as many people. And so I was only doing 4 to 5 people a month. But I did that for a number of years. I learned a lot by traveling to people's offices. I mean, I've seen clinics that are unbelievably beautiful, and I've seen clinics that I look at them and the first thing I say is, we've got to move you. This is disgusting. Like, nobody's going to trust you in this place. So I tried to add it up before, but with all seriousness, between the consulting I did with that group out of Florida and then my own, I'm close to a couple thousand offices that I've been inside their doors.
Wow.
Like I've seen a lot of clinics in all 50 states. I've been to all 50 states multiple times. And so I really, God, now not knowing it, so looking at it back from today, but God literally did give me the experiences I needed to do the battling that I'm doing today because I have such firsthand knowledge of what chiropractors are going through. I can't tell you how many times I've had, conversations at night, marital counseling, because the doctor's so out of balance in their personal life because they're so committed to the clinic and trying to provide that, the family's suffering. And, just crazy things that I got to be a part of at an age that I had really no business being a part of. But I just always had that swagger. I always had that, I don't know, I'll figure it out. Let's go. If God gives me the opportunity, he's going to give me the strength. And so I just kept moving forward. I'd make a bunch of mistakes. I'd make the mistakes right and I'd keep moving on. And, but yeah, so what the final part of your question, what I found with chiropractors is they go to school, they have a completely Disneyland impression of what practice is going to be like. They come out, they get kicked in the dong, and they are just chasing themselves every time after that. And the vision that they had that is still attainable for them, they don't believe is attainable because they've been chasing their tail since day one because the reality of overhead, getting out of the bubble of clinic, the falsities and the lying that happens when you're in school by every consultant or even your school itself telling you the falsities of what real life is like. And then they get out to a profession that inherently eats its young because we're not organized. We don't have a spirit of affluence like we did in the 80s. And so everyone's a little bit in survival mode. And so you kind of come out feeling like you have to be on your own. You're the only person you can really trust. And you don't, literally you come out already knowing there are bad chiropractors and you need to find the good ones. And so that puts you on the defensive right away. And then you're trying to make a living. And so you buy the lie of insurance and then you start accepting all insurances and then you don't know what you're doing there and audits and you have everyone scaring you to death. Like there's just all this pressure that if we could organize and we could support each other, even on a very elementary level, I think we wouldn't have the chaos and confusion that we have in the profession right now. And that, I don't mean to be doom and gloom because there's still a lot of great things happening and it's still the best time ever to be a chiropractor in today's world. But that yearning to belong, that yearning to feel like you're a part of something bigger than yourself is the biggest obstacle for most chiros that lead them down the road of struggling in practice, even though they're great adjusters, maybe they're great communicators, but they just haven't found that home. And that's where I do think consulting really does help. It's at least a home. It's like-minded people in a space, but it's oftentimes clouded by the economics of the relationship where you're giving, and you might get a little back, but you start feeling like it's out of exchange. I'm paying for a bunch of stuff and I'm not getting any further ahead. And so then they get disgruntled and then they leave that family and, it creates all of that baggage. So yeah, I think if we could just step out and take a deep breath and believe we can build the practices that each individual person wants to build, which you can, it becomes a lot more freeing. So there was a lot there, but that's kind of what's on my mind.
But a lot of good. I mean, I think that's that's what I find. I mean, a lot of the things that you just said, that thing people struggle with, we work with a lot of chiropractors in the marketing space, and it's like the thing that we see more than anything is like they just don't want to get out of their way sometimes.
Yeah.
Like they don't want to get out of their own way. And it's like they have this mentality that like everybody is out to get them. And it's like we have to get to the point where we can start trusting and building relationships that are going to ultimately push everybody forward.
100%.
Right. And this is this is part of the reason why we started this podcast is simply to be able to like speak with people in this profession who have gone through it, right? The struggles, the good, the bad, and like there is a path here and we are all so much more alike than we are different. And yes, we have different philosophical beliefs or, some people don't want to do this or do that. And so like totally understanding that. And that's why I think that, the organization that you've started is so cool because we need more of that, right? Because we're never going to get where we need to as a profession if we don't have that kind of thing available. So on that point, tell me a little bit about, you said it was one chiropractic. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so when I went through all that stuff at the association and I was going through, the attacks and all the infighting, and we had built something very special in Ohio. We really had. We went from when I started, we were right around 300 members. When I left, we were around 1,300 members in 6 years. So that's pretty exceptional
It's
growth.
amazing.
There's not many
Yeah.
states that have ever experienced that. And it wasn't just because of me. It was because there were a lot of people at the right places that were willing to buy into this idea that an association was more than just lobbying and CEs, that we really do have a responsibility to be the marketing arm for the profession, to build relationship with employers, to build relationships in all these little communities. And so I took a very business approach to running the association rather than a political approach. And it worked great because the association was really a mess when I joined it. So no one really cared. So no one cared what I was doing. And they just said, as long as it doesn't go away, go ahead. And then the growth started happening. So everyone was really excited about the growth. But then once we kind of hit a level and we were financially secure and all this stuff, then everyone started having ideas of where we should spend our money and now how we should use our influence. And that's where the circle of the wagons and shoot inward started. So I read that quote from Buckminster Fuller, and I knew what was possible because I had just lived it. I had just done it. I did what no one else thought could be done. I took an association where everyone hated the association, and we grew to the largest that it had ever been in its history. And there was a specific path that I took to do that. And so I knew it worked, and I knew it worked with chiropractors, and I knew it worked with a large number of them. But I was so frustrated that I was still basically subject to my board, and I couldn't do everything if my board said no. They ran a bunch of seats to put people on the board that did not like what I was doing and didn't like that I was not a chiropractor and didn't like that I was out there talking chiropractic and all that kind of stuff. And so I finally just said, I'm not going to sit here and kick against myself. I'm going to resign. I don't want what we have built to go bad because everyone's attacking me. If I'm becoming the focal point, I'm going to remove myself from the equation. I want the association to survive. And I sure as hell wasn't going to be doing what was going on anymore either. So I definitely had my fill. But I left, and One Chiropractic, it was a project of love for myself, my mentor at the time, Dr. Tom Clapp, and a number of other individuals that all looked at the profession of chiropractic saying, there isn't an organization right now that's capable, not that they don't have the desire, not that they're bad people, but there was no organization at the profession at that time that was capable of doing the work that needed to be done. And what I mean by that is, as you've experienced, even you being on the board, and it's not the fault of associations. Associations will never stand and draw a line in the sand because they can't, because half their membership won't agree with it. And so, when it came to COVID, for example, there were a lot of state associations that were not going to burn their relationships in the Capitol over an issue of vaccines, even though they knew that half of their membership could potentially get thrown out of their practice. But for them to go and say, absolutely not, chiropractors will not be vaccinated, we're going to sue the government, they would burn every bridge that they had ever built with their governor and that party if they'd have done that, right? And so there's this juxtaposition where you're like, yes, this is a big issue for today, but what about all the other issues we've been working on for decades? I could lose all of that overnight for this one issue, and half of my membership is okay with it. So what am I? So you're always in this position, and you've been in those board meetings where it's like, yeah, we kind of know this needs to happen, but we don't have the votes, or we can't do this because of this or that. And so they sit and they don't really do anything other than basic lobbying and putting on CE events and putting out fires. That's not their fault. It's just the way they're structured. We just have to be honest with that reality that membership organizations are only going to be able to do basic type work on behalf of the profession. I'm not taking away from that. Some of that work is amazing. What the Michigan Association of Chiropractors did to change their scope and how they came together is amazing. What Florida Chiropractic Association and the Florida Chiropractic Society has done down there with laws, it's great work. But I'm going to tell you, the proof is in the pudding, that right now in the United States, most of the state associations, when I say most, I mean like 80% of them, do not even have 50% membership of the licensed chiropractors in their state. So if they were doing the work that I'm talking about, we would have the organization that we don't have. And so the number one, people ask me this all the time, what's the biggest threat to chiropractic? The biggest threat is our inability to organize. Has been from day one and will continue to be until we figure it out. As long as they keep us segmented and they keep us fighting against each other, They're not our enemy. Pharma's not our enemy. AMA's not our enemy. Medical doctors are not. Allopathic medicine's not our enemy. They're staying out of our way and allowing us to self-destruct on our own. So we wanted to create an organization that was built to maneuver quick and fast. We're not a membership organization. We're a directorship. We are a nonprofit, but we operate like a corporation. I am the president CEO. I get to make the decisions. I have a board over me that makes sure I don't pee too far off the paper. But at the end of the day, I don't have to go and get approval every time something needs to be done. Because we don't have members and we have contributors, you vote with your checkbook. If you don't like the work we're doing, you stop contributing. If you like the work you're doing, you're going to continue to contribute. It's that simple. So it's really a capitalistic mentality that people will only be a part of what they want to be a part of. But what we learned is we were action oriented and we were going to do work and we got work done very quickly and very efficiently. People liked that. And that's how we were able to grow to 4,000 people contributing worldwide to become one of the larger organizations in the profession, because we were just geared towards getting work done. Like, I'm not going to ask your permission. I'm going to do what I feel needs to be done. It's how we could react so quickly during COVID and the vaccine mandates. It's why we were the only group in Australia, over 700 chiropractors we were defending, making sure that they could stay in practice every day. I mean, we spent over $500,000 in legal defense, ensuring chiropractic could practice, but not a single person lost their ability to practice by standing strong to the vaccine anywhere in the world that we represented. So I'm very proud of that statistic. I mean, we're over 3 million now in defense of chiropractic over the last 4 years since August of 21. And we're the only group that can give those statistics because we're the only group fighting this fight. Not saying there aren't other groups doing good things. There are, but nobody's doing the work we're doing. And we are positioned now by having attorneys all over the world and PR firms and lobbyists. We're positioned now that if anything like COVID ever happened again, it would be a very different reality for us. We wouldn't have as many of those scary times because we have the pieces in place now to respond immediately, to be able to do injunctions, to be able to stop the attack right where it's at. And so that's kind of the joy that I get to live every day, is I really get to be at the tip of the spear. And I don't have to wait on people to do the work that needs to be done.
Well, and I mean, I know, during very early on in COVID, we were having issues here in Illinois, and it was all of an hour between sending an email and, getting you on the phone to talk to you about what was happening in Illinois, for us personally. And so, from chiropractors to you, thank you for what you did during that time, because it helped us to be able to navigate the issues that we were dealing with, to be able to make sure that our chiropractors could still practice.
Yeah.
And that's, so important. But I think that sometimes we just overlook those things because I think that I would imagine you would agree with the sentiment that, like, a lot of times chiropractors are so almost self-focused that they don't think about the greater picture of, like, what's happening in the profession.
Yeah. I think that's human nature, right? That we worry about our four walls. And, it's funny because I'm a big history buff. And so I've done a lot of listening and reading about the World War II. And, what happened in Europe was the mentality of people only worrying. Like, Russia's a perfect example. I don't care about what's happening in Germany until Germany came into Russia.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And, and so that, I just literally just finished a book that talks about the Russian perspective of World War II and how they just couldn't believe it. Like, they didn't get involved in the beginning when Hitler was starting and he was going the other way. And they were like, but he knows better. He won't go into Russia. Not our problem. And then it was. And so we can't have this mindset that it will wait until it's at our front door, because if it's at our front door, it's too late. And chiropractic has done that in our history all the time. And I'm trying to change it. So here's a perfect example of how we're working with groups. So the reason we work so well with state associations, and we worked very well with your state association, was we understood what your guys' abilities and limitations were. We wanted to take the flak. We didn't want you to burn your political chips. We wanted you to stay the good cop. And then we were the bad cop. And that worked amazingly well in Australia. About 5 years ago, the regulatory body in Australia put a policy in place that chiropractors could not do a manual manipulation to children 2 and under. You could not do a high velocity, low amplitude adjustment. Now, the world doesn't know that. They just think that it's dangerous for 2-year-olds to see a chiropractor. That's the way that's translated to the world.
Yep.
Well, they had zero evidence to support that policy. They were doing it to shut up a big activist group. but they, they shouldn't have done it, and it impacted clinics. There are people in the general public that really believe that an adjustment was dangerous to children. So when we got involved after COVID and all that stuff was going, we were looking at some of the other issues facing Australia, and we were like, this has got to get cleaned up. This policy, because if it sticks, it's going to spread, and you're going to start seeing it hit Canada, and then once it hits Canada, you're going to see it hit United States, and we got to kill these things where they're at. So we started working on it, working with the Australian Chiropractic Association. I kept telling them, don't publicly support us. Don't come out and say CDC's awesome, we're partnering with them. Don't do any of that. You keep being the good cop and say, hey, we've got this other organization that is pretty vigorous, and we want to stay connected with you, regulatory body. Like, can we figure this out? And then I started talking that we are going to file a lawsuit because they weren't justified in it. And they were the good cop saying, hey, we just saw this. We don't want it to come to this. The policy's been enacted. But long story short, they pulled the policy. So it was a perfect relationship between us threatening, being the bad guy, them being the good cop, keeping that line of communication with the regulatory body that I would never be able to develop. And we've got things done. So that's the perfect relationship that needs to happen. And so I've been training the chiropractors in Australia. Don't get mad at the ACA because they weren't talking as bold as I was. They shouldn't have been. They should have been doing the diplomatic route. That's their job. They're in the politics of your government. I'm not. If the politics don't get it done, I'm going to come in and blow some shit up, right? And so, but I'm working with the ACA behind the scenes, making sure that we all understand I'm not doing anything that sabotages their efforts. Our profession's never had that 1-2 punch that's why we created it the way that we did, not to step on anyone's toes, but to be able to do the work that needs to be done and respect the boundaries of the organizations that exist. And then retrain chiropractors to understand we need an organization that's going to go to war, and we need an organization that's going to sit down and create a peace policy, because those are both valid solutions for any given issue, but we don't know which one we need until we get into the battle. And that's the beauty of why I say there's never been a better time to be a chiropractor is than right now, because we're finally figuring this out from a organizational perspective. We have the same thing with the Foundation for Chiropractic Progress. All they do is market for chiropractic. They don't step on anyone's toes. So I've used them as a weapon in our Operation Free Speech over in Australia and New Zealand, where there's censorship issues. So I've been bringing the foundation over there saying, you can say anything they tell you and we'll defend you if the regulatory body has any issue, because that's all sourced. We know we can support it. We know we can validate it. And your regulatory board is wrong by saying you can't say it. And so we're working together, right? We're finding these organizations that are very good at their one thing, and we're doing our job in this particular space, and it's changing the reality of practice in those markets. We're doing the same thing here in the United States with animal chiropractic. That's a big confusing space. Illinois is one of those spaces where animal chiropractic is kind of confusing because they're saying you have to be referred to or be under the supervision of a vet, but you don't really, because the vet board doesn't rule your license. And so there's confusion there. And so we're working with state associations and licensing boards around the United States to standardize that language so chiropractors stop getting cease and desist letters from vet boards or stop getting threatened with fines and losing their license. And so we're the guys going in and kind of knocking heads a little bit saying, let's figure this out. But we're working with the political organizations to actually create the language and get the work done. So it's the first time in the history of chiropractic we've had an organization to kind of do that work on behalf. And then we're filing a lawsuit against insurance companies saying you cannot take money back from providers without their permission. And they've been doing it. They've been clawing money back for decades. We know that's a violation. We hired the best firm in the United States for this work. They have a proven track record, and we're going to hold them accountable. So there's never been an organization to do that. An association can't do that because of their status and because of their membership. They need to get their membership permission. And then if the membership doesn't agree with it, the attorney firms don't like it because of the way they can't generate the capital, all that crazy stuff. We take all of that stuff out of the equation and make it available.
It's amazing. I mean, the fact that you've got this many irons in the fire to just serve and take care of this profession is just, it's otherworldly. I think it's amazing that we have people like yourself that are willing to step up and do these sort of things. And I think that it's frustrating when we look at what is happening to chiropractors from a political standpoint, and, it just adds one more additional barrier for that chiropractor coming out of school that's wanting to come out and is full of piss and vinegar to come out and
Yeah.
open a practice and try and make a life for themselves and preach chiropractic and subluxation or whatever
Yeah.
their message is. It's just these things make it much more difficult for them to just focus on the things
Yep.
that they need to focus on.
And I want to comment on that real quick. I don't mean to cut you off, but I don't want to miss this opportunity to say this because I get into these arguments more than I want to. I want to be very clear. I myself I'm a vitalistic guy. Our clinic, all we do is adjust, and we maintenance tests is once a week because we know that's how often the brain creates patterns. I want to stay ahead of that pattern, and I know what the adjustment does to the brain. And so I am very vitalistic and subluxation oriented in the way that I still have a clinic in Columbus, Ohio. That's how we practice. We're all cash. We don't even see Medicare. Like I am bought in hook, line, and sinker to the philosophy of chiropractic. That's Baron.
Yep.
But my organization, I don't give a rat's tail if you're just an all PI pain clinic. If you have a DC after your name, I'm going to defend your rights. We have to be okay with that. This whole straights and mixers, vitalistic against mechanistic. Listen, we're not big enough to have that fight yet. We're not seeing enough of the population to have that fight yet. My belief system, if I'm putting the cards on the table, I know that my way of practice is the right way because of the joy that we have every single day, both my staff and our patients. I know the mechanistic way of practice is not a fun practice. People are always hurting. You're constantly looking for reimbursement. You're doing way too much documentation to try to prove to the man that they owe you. And you always have that threat of an audit coming over your back, whether it's Medicare or major med or personal injury. But people do that because they think that's an easier way to pay the bills. Like there's more money in that, which is what chiropractic has become over the last 20 years. So I think if we can just get us all together and we can all just agree that there are things that attack our potential way of life, and there needs to be an organization to stop that from happening, whatever that is. For example, I was just on the phone with an attorney the other day about making sure that employers cannot stop chiropractors from doing DOT physicals. I don't want to do those. I can't imagine doing those every day, all day. Like that's just weird to me, but a chiropractor should be able to do it if they're educated to do it. So I'm going to defend that. So it's not a vitalistic mechanistic thing for me. It's a protecting the rights of practicing chiropractors. So, I get some of the people that are the hate straights that come at me and say, oh, you're out there trying to get chiropractors to do physical exams. I'm like, you're right, because they're allowed to do it under the law and there shouldn't be anyone telling them they can't. And so I'm going to defend that. And then I got the mixers. You're just wanting to make everyone just adjusters. I'm like, no, but the adjusters have a right to be able to be in practice and treat people weekly because there's scientific evidence that supports the necessity of that. And I'm not going to let any other insurance company tell them that that's not medically necessary because it is, right? So there's this gamut of it, but we as a profession have to stop thinking that our way is the right way. And if someone's not doing it our way, it's wrong. It's the same reason we all drive different cars. Same reason we all like different music. Same reason we all wear different clothes. Same reason we all have different haircuts. Celebrate those differences. If you're a DC, if your heart's like my heart, give me your hand. You're going to express it differently. But here's the beauty of that. And this fits into you and your marketing, which is why, Kendall, you and I got along really well when we first met. There are so many people on this planet that need chiropractic, but they're not going to all want it the same way. And there are certain patients I don't want to see. We do not do workers' comp. We do not do personal injury. Even if an existing patient gets into an auto accident, I refer them to somebody that has a better system to deal with attorneys and personal injury than we do. And when they're done with their personal injury case, they can come back and continue with us. If they liked it over there better, they can stay there. We will not do personal injury. I do the same thing with work comp. If an existing person gets hurt at work, I'm referring you to someone that's got a better practice to be able to deal with the ins and outs of dealing with workers' comp and the bureau. Because I need those friends. So I'm glad there are people out there that practice that way because I don't want to. And they don't want to practice the way I do. So when they're done with their auto accident people, they say, listen, you need to stay under chiropractic care, but we're not built for that. You need to go see Patriot Chiropractic. They're really good, awesome. They're all cash. Very simple. You have no benefits left on your major med or your bureau, but stay under care, right? So if we could grab that mindset and be okay with that and security in ourselves. Do you realize, and no offense, but we wouldn't need marketing companies. We all attract so many damn people into our practice. We just blow through them because we're not the right people for those people, that if we just referred, man, everyone would have all they need.
Yeah. I mean, I think to your point, I think that there's two sort of conversations there. I think that there's the political conversation and a philosophical conversation.
100%.
And like what we're talking about politics. I mean, politics, like you have to play. We're in a system, right?
100%.
We're in a machine. And
Yes.
if we don't play to the machine, for us to be able to do what we love and being a a chiropractor and being in this profession, there's just no
You have a
way.
scope of practice in your state that needs to be protected, and your state association, that's their job, and they're doing that. Like,
Yep.
that's why I love and say that I'm not knocking associations. It's just everybody wants the associations to do everything, and they're not capable of doing everything, which is why we created our organization to come alongside them and do the rest of the work that needs to be done. But you're
Yeah.
right. We can't throw our, I read some of these forums, Jim Chester, which I love Jim at Chiro Hustle, but he posts all of these questions all the time on Facebook, and he's very antagonistic, which is very entertaining. And I hear
I read them daily.
yeah, it's so funny to me, but it's
Yeah.
interesting where people are at, right? There are some people that are like CCE, FCLB, they're all a problem. We need to No, they're not. They're not. They are mechanisms of a system that is annoying, but that system also has protections for us as well that enables us to do what we do in our states. And so am I saying they all run perfectly? No, but to say they're the problem, they're not the problem. The problem is we can't organize as a profession. So we have extremes because we're all in poverty mindset. That's why I keep telling people we have this thing going right now with our organization. Our goal is to get 10,000 chiropractors under our umbrella. That's 10,000 people around the world giving us 33 US dollars a month. That's all we ask for. That's all it takes to be under our protection is 33 US dollars a month. And I tell them 10,000 chiropractors moving in one direction are unstoppable. That's really it. We have 180,000 licensed chiropractors around the world, give or take. 10,000 of us moving in one direction at one time is, believe it or not, unstoppable. I could fight the AMA. I could fight Big Pharma. I could fight, the hospitals. I could do any of that. Literally 10,000 people giving me $33 a month. I could literally take on any battle that our profession could ever face. I'm already suing governments and I'm only at 2,300. Right. So you have to understand how these battles work and how they're long and sustained. We created our financial structure for the battle. It's just like we got the right equipment for the type of game we're playing. You're not going to wear football gear in the game of baseball. Right. But we are structured economically and resource wise in a way to do the work that we do, which are long sustained battles. So that's why we ask for $33 a month rather than going out and asking people to give thousands of dollars, because that doesn't help me. To raise 100 grand one month and then nothing the next month doesn't help me with the way that we have to spend money. And so, if we could just accept that idea that when we're organized, the power and the strength that we actually have, that'd be the game changer. That would absolutely be the game changer. And that's, I believe in my lifetime it's going to happen. I'm committed to doing it. I've built an entire organization around that concept. And I think that the profession's ready for it. I think people, if they could hear the message, if they could hear what you and I are saying right now, and they understand that we've learned a lot over the last few years about how our profession operates, how the world operates, and the opportunities that are in front of us, which there are way more opportunities than there are threats. I promise you. But not if we're going to continue to be segmented. But if we can organize and we can just come under this idea that at least the profession, if you have a DC after your name, there needs to be a Navy SEAL type special forces team that's going to go and kick the shit out of anyone trying to take that away from you. If we can just agree on that, that's going to give freedom and comfort for groups like you and your organization to help doctors to feel more comfortable to step out and start speaking the truth of chiropractic, and gives you more material for marketing purposes on social media, on websites, to start saying, yes, there is a direct correlation to adjustments and colic, and not be afraid of them getting rung up by the regulatory body, because if they're connected to us, we're going to defend them. So Dr. Tony Ebel and his PX, we just went through all of their material that they're putting out with their perfect storm and all of that, making sure that it's defendable. Now, any of his people that use that stuff that are under our umbrella, if they have any regulatory board reach out to them and say, you can't do that, we defend them at no cost. That's the power of 10,000 people moving in one direction at one time. It doesn't have to be expensive. It's just about a group of people coming together.
I love it. I love it. So, Doc, we're coming up on time here. So if people want to reach out, if they want to learn more about the things that you have going on, what is the best way for them to find out more information? What's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Yeah. So our website is defendchiropractic.org. Defendchiropractic.org. We also have a podcast called The State of Chiropractic. I'm constantly putting stuff out every week, talking about the battles that are facing. It's kind of like State of the Union, but State of Chiropractic. You can find that on any of your podcast sources, whether it's iTunes or Podbean or whatever method that you do, that Amazon, they're all available. And we also have a journal that we put out called The State of Chiropractic that is only talking about the battles and a little bit deeper dive into maybe issues that you care about, like x-ray rights in British Columbia that we're fighting for, those types of stuff. And so, yeah, but defendchiropractic.org. If you do the contact us there, that goes directly to me. So I'm happy to answer any questions. But man, and if this all sounds good to you, we'd love you to be one of the 10,000, man. Just jump on. It's $33 a month. It's pretty basic, pretty simple, less than one adjustment a month that we're asking for you to have your own protection, but also to help us protect the rest of the profession around the world.
Baron, thank you so much for coming on. I hope everybody enjoyed, and make sure that you like and subscribe. If you enjoyed this episode of Table Talk, a chiropractic podcast, make sure that you subscribe and check out the links below to our free Facebook group with chiropractic marketing secrets, our free resource guides, and the links to all of the guests that we have here on the show and ways to be able to connect with them. Thanks and God bless.